Welcome back to GLBC Connections. Today I want to follow up on Andrew's message and lesson from Monday where he talks about the issue of uncleanness. To do that, I want to tell you that I had a small, very minor procedure at the hospital the other day, and as I went through that, they gave me a hospital gown, and the nurse told me, go into the bathroom and put this gown on. So I went in, and of course it's 2020, so I was wearing a mask, as we have to do everywhere. And as I was putting my stuff on, I'm ashamed to say I dropped the mask on the floor of the bathroom. And I was aghast, and I didn't know what to do. And I snatched it up, and I looked all around. I thought, well, I'll just replace it with another mask, but I couldn't find one. There wasn't one in the room, and I was too embarrassed to admit that I'd done it, and I didn't want them to have to reschedule the procedure. And so I did what I'm sure will cause many of you to be a little grossed out, but I didn't know what else to do. I just put the mask back on and muscled through it in the laundry when I came home, but actually wore it for several more hours and all the way through the procedure. That grosses us out because we have strong feelings about things that are not clean, particularly in 2020. Well, that was true in the first century as well. They had strong opinions about things that were unclean. But by unclean, they meant something different. They didn't mean unhygienic. They didn't mean dirty or something that was germy. For the times of Jesus, when they said unclean, what they meant was things that keep us from the presence of God, those things that block us from the presence of God. And what the Pharisees thought was that there are things in our lives, things that we come in contact with that make us unclean. They thought certain types of food made them unclean. They thought actually coming into contact with Gentiles, non-Jewish people, made them unclean. They thought coming in contact with unbelievers made them unclean. And that gets to be a big point of contention between Jesus and the Pharisees, and he's trying to teach the people of Israel what uncleanliness really is, what really keeps us from God. And that's the issue. The issue of uncleanness is what keeps us from the presence of God. Well, notice what Jesus says here. He follows up on the story that Andrew talked about last week. When he talked about it on Monday. In verse 14, we pick it up. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean." So Jesus says it's not the exterior things that come to you that make you unclean. It's what is in you that comes out that makes you unclean. So what keeps us from God, Jesus says, it's the things in us that flow outward. He's going to expand on that, but that's a really important point. What keeps us from God? Well, the Jewish people said it's the things we touch, the things we come in contact with. Jesus says, no, it's the things in you. Picks it up here in verse 17. After he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. In other words, they say, what do you mean, Jesus? Jesus answers, "Are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and then out of his body." In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. So Jesus says it's not the things that you touch and the things that you eat that make you unclean. Those aren't the things that keep you from the presence of God. Rather, Jesus says it's what's in here that flows outward. And then he expands. What are those things? What is in here that flows outward? He went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts come, listen to these things, evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and make a man unclean. What keeps us from the presence of God? What makes us unclean in God's sight? It's sin. And where does that come from? Jesus says it comes from the human heart. It comes from in here. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, when he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, made that exact point when he said the dividing line between good and evil, it doesn't run through governments. It's not the idea this government is good and this one's bad. He says it doesn't run through ethnicities. The Russian people are good, American people are bad, or German people are good, French people are bad. No, he says it doesn't. That's not where the line runs between good and evil. Solzhenitsyn says powerfully and profoundly, he says, the dividing line between good and evil runs through every human heart. This is fundamental to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Even for us, sometimes I think we get the notion that uncleanness has to do with things that are outside, that it does have to do with political parties or ethnicities or other nations or belief systems. That's not the issue. The issue is a matter of the heart. Sin comes from within and it flows outward. That's what makes us unclean. That's what makes us unable to come to the presence of God. This really is the heart of the gospel, or at least the very beginning of the gospel. That the human heart is hopeless. That dividing line between good and evil is in here, not out there. That it's not political systems, it's not government systems, and it's not race or ethnicity or nationality or anything we could dream of. Rather, it exists in every human heart. Well, Jesus sort of leaves it at that point, at least here in Mark 7. He doesn't expound any more on it. And it leaves us feeling pretty hopeless because if it's true, what we discover is that dividing line, that uncleanness exists in every human heart. And if that's true, every person is stuck outside of the presence of God with no hope of getting there. But the message of the gospel is more profound and deeper than just that hopelessness. It is a reminder that Jesus Christ himself is the one who breaks that dividing line. And he does that through his death and resurrection. How do we enter into a life that is not filled with hatred and deceit and lewdness and all the things that he lists? How do we keep our inner life peaceful? How do we keep our inner life in such a way that we can enter the presence of God? We do that by putting our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And when we do that, we're united with him through the Holy Spirit, and he changes our heart. That's the only way. There is no way to the presence of God outside of Jesus Christ. This is the heart of the gospel. There is no getting around it. And we have to believe and trust in Jesus Christ and let him, through that uniting of him and us with the Holy Spirit, let him change our hearts. Let him change what's inside so that what comes out is cleanness. That's our hope. That's our trust. I hope you take that lesson to heart and that message to heart and remember that there is no way to the presence of God outside of trust in Jesus Christ. Thanks for joining us today.